Hey, this is Ben Goertzel. I'm the CEO of SingularityNET, a project that's building a decentralized blockchain-based infrastructure to power the world's narrow AI and then AGI. And I'm also the founder of a whole bunch of other projects in the AI space, including the OpenCog project, where we're now building a new version of the OpenCog AGI system called OpenCog Hyperon, which I'm optimistic is going to be the software system running on top of the decentralized SingularityNET network that can finally make the breakthrough toward artificial general intelligence. And what I want to talk to you about today is some more theoretical notions related to AI and AGI specifically. I want to focus on the concept of open-ended intelligence, and connected to that, what I'm thinking of as open-ended motivations as a different from the usual way to think about the values, goals, and motivations driving intelligent systems. The concept of open-ended intelligence and open-ended motivations applies to all sorts of intelligent systems. It applies to human beings or dolphins or corporations or the emergent global brain on the planet Earth. It also applies to AGI systems, of the sort that, for example, we're trying to build in the SingularityNET and OpenCog projects. Before launching into open-ended intelligence, I'll say just a couple words about how I see these ideas fitting into the practical development of society as we progress toward the singularity in the next few decades. So, since the name of the blockchain project I'm leading is SingularityNET, you may guess that I'm something of a singularitarian, right? So I think it's not necessarily fully predestined, but it's highly likely that we are going to hit a technological singularity within the next few decades, where a singularity, was defined roughly as a point in time when the advance of technology becomes so fast, it's effectively infinite from a human perspective. Say new Nobel Prize level discoveries, being made multiple times a second. New inventions coming out so quickly, nobody can even understand what they are or what they're for, let alone use them all. And the singularity of this nature pretty much needs to be brought about by transhuman minds. They could be, improved human minds. I think the most likely case is that they are AGI, artificial general intelligence minds, although some AGIs may have human brains and bodies hooked into them. I think the vast mass of intelligent processing power by the time you're into a singularity is going to be non-human in nature. And if you agree with this, I mean, if you believe that exponential progress is leading us toward a technological singularity a few decades from now, then it follows there's nothing more important to be thinking about and working on than how to make this singularity come out really well for everyone, right? So, I mean, how soon is soon? Ray Kurzweil forecasts 2045 for the technological singularity. We forecast 2029 for human level AI and the 16-year gap in between. I doubt there's going to be a 16-year gap in between a human level AI and a massively superhuman AI. I mean, it might be more than a 5-minute gap. It could be years if that human level AI wants to be careful about its own development, as I would be careful about modifying my own brain, even if I had the strong technical capability to do so. 16 years seems long to me for that gap between human level AI and superhuman AGI, aka Singularity. 2029 seems pretty plausible to me for getting to human level artificial general intelligence. I mean, I think it could even be a little bit sooner than that. It could take a little longer, but it seems about right. And one way to conceptualize this is to think about the bursts of progress we've seen in different subfields of narrow AI recently. I mean, I've been working on AI since the 1980s. We had the concept of human level and superhuman AI well back before that. But when I started working in the AI field, you couldn't even talk about human level AI or superintelligence or artificial general intelligence, in the conference seminar room. You had to talk about it in the bar after work, right? And things have advanced a lot in terms of acceptance of the notion of advanced AI, as well as in terms of practical achievements in the AI field. I introduced the term and concept of AGI, artificial general intelligence, around 2004, 2005, in a book from Springer of that name, Artificial General Intelligence. And even at that time, in the early aughts, when I published the book called Artificial General Intelligence, and in 2006, when I organized the first Artificial General Intelligence conference, I mean, even then, it was quite on the margins, right? And now, of course, the vast majority of work on AI in the world is still narrow AI, aimed at AIs that are narrow in the sense that they can only carry out certain very particular functions. The concept of artificial general intelligence, it can generalize far beyond its experience and training data, and the concept of superintelligence, that's far above the human level in its ability to generalize, reason, learn, create, and imagine. I mean, these concepts are fairly broadly accepted as at least realistic and sensible things to be thinking about. Now, why did this happen? Part of it, of course, is AI, while still mainly narrow AI, is just doing a lot more things now, right? And how did this happen? Well, it happened not with linear progress, it happened in bursts. So in computer vision, the huge burst started around 2014. Between 2014, when you had early vision systems like AlexNet, and 2017 or so, I mean, computer vision went from being a research topic with a few deployed applications to being something that's deployed across all sorts of different industries and is a big business. And it's taken for granted by everyone. Like, no one's wowed anymore when Facebook automatically labels a face that you upload, or when you walk into a conference and a camera takes a picture of your face and recognizes your ID, right? This is taken for granted. But I mean, before this burst in computer vision from 2014 to 2017, this stuff didn't really work well enough to be used widely. Natural language processing more recently went through a big burst of functionality, beginning with the BERT model, which was, I guess, 2018 or so. So you had BERT, which is from Google and Mountain View. Then you had the GPT models, and this burst of progress in natural language processing, which is centered on transformer neural networks, hasn't fully solved NLP. I mean, the transformer neural models like GPT still have no idea of the meaning of what they're talking about, many limitations. But this burst of progress over a few years took natural language processing, from being a research subfield with a handful of practical applications to being a much more mature domain of science and industry with practical applications all over the map. So why were the computer vision and natural language processing revolutions, roughly a few years in duration? That really has to do with the human scale of doing things, right? How long does it take us to upload stuff to GitHub? How long does it take us to run an experiment? How long does it take us to read a paper and summarize results? How long does it take us to explain what we're doing to another person? So you need a series of iteratively improved software systems, which are being deployed by a wider and wider group of people. And that takes a few years for knowledge to propagate and variational experiments to get done. I think that for AGI, we can expect to see the same sort of trajectory. There's going to be a few-year period where AGI transitions from being a marginal research topic with a few things that are interesting here and there to being something that actually works and is mature and is used all across different domains of industry. And this 3-year burst will put AGI on the map in the way that computer vision and natural language processing put on the map during their own bursts of exponential acceleration. When will this burst of accelerated progress on AGI happen? Well, we don't know that for sure. I'm hoping to launch that, of course, with the next version of the OpenCog project, OpenCog Hyperon, running on the SingularityNET platform and on our custom Hypercycle blockchain and so forth. If that's true, Hyperon to be mature enough to start the burst in 2024 or so. We had a 3-year burst of insane progress starting in 2024 that brings us to 2027. I mean, we're not too far off then from Ray's projection of 2029 for human level AI, right? So this is the way I'm thinking about it. I mean, we're still not to AGI. I mean, the AIs out there in the world now are pretty narrow in their function, without a deep semantic understanding of what they're doing, without an understanding of themselves and the relation between themselves and the world. But the nature of the exponential path to the singularity is a series of cascaded S-curves. We had an S-curve for vision, we had an S-curve for NLP, we'll have an S-curve for AGI, but this S-curve for AGI is special because the S-curve for human level AGI will trigger human level systems that can then rewrite their own code, rethink their own existence, rebuild their own hardware. And then that will bring us into a whole new domain of superintelligence, right? And this is super exciting. Many people find it very scary. And what I want to launch into now is some more philosophical thinking about, what the hell are we doing creating these AGI systems that are going to, if I'm right and the other singularitarians are right, if we're right, they're going to vastly exceed the intelligence, imagination, and practical capability, and probably experiential consciousness level of human beings within years to at most a few decades, right? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? So in the broad sense, the answer to why are we doing this is really that us doing this is a very limited view of what's going on. I mean, human beings are complex self-organizing systems that emerge through evolutionary processes that we only partially understand. And, these evolutionary processes, since the Big Bang aggregated matter into denser and denser clouds and aggregated stars and planets, and then on Earth created a primordial soup out of which, oozed one-celled organisms and multi-celled organisms, and the organisms that came out of the water onto the land, and then began building tools and developing language. I mean, we came out of this whole creative process of self-organization and evolution, which is itself a fantastic sort of general intelligence. And the nature of this self-organizing evolutionary process is that, within certain conditions, it creates escalating amounts of complexity, and there are punctuate equilibria, right? There are time periods where it remains about the same, then there are bursts where a lot of things happen, right? So this is the nature of the whole complex self-organizing evolutionary, meta ecosystem within which humans exist. It's not unique to humanity, and it's also the nature of this overall process that phases happen faster and faster. It took hundreds of millions of years for like the initial disorganization of the Big Bang to start to congeal into the sorts of matter we would now recognize, right? And then in the history of the universe, the emergence of planets was pretty recent. In the history of life on Earth, the emergence of advanced organisms with complex nervous systems was pretty recent. In the history of advanced organisms with complex nervous systems, language and tools of any sophistication are pretty recent. So I mean, each phase of evolution of complexity seems to get more and more compressed, right? And Ray Kurzweil has been over this, many others have written about this. But what it means is that our feeling that this is something we're doing by our own will and our own understanding and our own human motivation, it's a half truth, right? It's a paraconsistent truth. It's true and false. There is our own motivation, our own feeling, our own oomph and push, and our own choices that has, these things have their own sort of reality. But these are also part of a broader self-organizing force, right? And this is quite important to remember, and it's quite practical, and you can see the consequences when, otherwise very clever people who are thinking a lot about AI overlook the nature of these broader forces. I mean, Nick Bostrom, who I know quite well, will be one example. I mean, Nick and I worked together when we were both involved with the World Transhumanist Association. I remember working on revising the bylaws of the World Transhumanist Association with Nick, and that was well before his book Superintelligence. And Nick grew more and more concerned about existential risks over the course of his career. And I mean, he wrote the book Superintelligence partly to make a warning like, hey, AI much smarter than human may be coming, and we have no guarantees that it's going to give a crap about any human values, including preserving human life. And when Nick came to that conclusion, he started tossing around, well, should humanity slow down AI development? Should maybe AGI development be restricted to like only an elite group of researchers under the supervision of the UN or some watchdog body or something? Now, I never agreed fully with Nick's perspective in most respects. I mean, we both agree that superintelligence is very likely coming. We both agree that you cannot guarantee it will give a shit about humans. Nick appears to me to think it's probable that AGIs, if created without some sort of super special method, that AGIs that humans create will not care about humans and will just destroy humans either intentionally or casually. I personally think that's not very likely, although we can't rule out its possibility entirely. I think the most likely possibility is that AGIs that humanity creates will view us with some measure of nostalgia and care, much as I myself view, squirrels and ants and plants in the forest. But the point I want to make now is, I mean, Nick at a certain point was talking about restricting AGI development to a small group of elite developers under some sort of global ethics and safety watchdog. He's not talking about that much anymore. Why? Well, because AI technology, even before AGI, yields so much economic value and so much human value, so much good for people that it's spread everywhere. You can't put the cat out in the bag, right? Every country in the world has AI researchers and developers in it, and every major economy has AGI researchers and loads of AI companies delivering practical products. There's no way that, say, Google, Facebook, Tencent, Baidu, Yandex, there's no way that everyone working on commercial AI with AGI R&D groups kind of interwoven with their commercial AI development groups. There's no way all these people are going to stop developing toward AGI incrementally year after year with better and better narrow AI systems. These people aren't going to stop because of some philosophers fearing that superintelligence may be a threat to humanity. And then, Nick, most from his credit, he's a very rational, reasonable, intelligent guy. He realizes like that cat is out of the bag. And the nature of the mistake, I think, was not seeing clearly enough that the ramification of AI into a greater and greater diversity of increasingly generally intelligent systems doing useful things. This is part of the overall self-organization of form that gave rise to, the earth, mammals, and humans, and computers, and the internet in the first place, right? I mean, squelching this sort of natural proliferation of complexity that happens through evolution and self-organization squelching this is going to be really hard. And if you temporarily manage to do it, it's likely to cause some other nasty effects, right? And this finally brings us to the main theme that I want to talk about, and I've sort of been hinting at and building up to gradually, which is the notion of open-ended intelligence. And in a formal intellectual way, the concept of open-ended intelligence was articulated in the PhD thesis by my friend Weaver at the Free University of Brussels. He wrote this thesis under supervision of Francis Heiligen at the Global Brain Institute at the Free University of Brussels. And, Weaver wrote his thesis on open-ended intelligence partly because that is how he thinks about intelligence. And he thought it was just interesting and beautiful thing to flesh out, but partly to form a contrast to very closed-minded, closed-ended conceptions of intelligence that have become commonplace in the commercial and academic AI community. I mean, a lot of people now are thinking about intelligent systems as sort of reinforcement learning systems that are trying to optimize their expected reward over some future time horizon based on some reward function that was wired into them. And this is a really obscenely, ridiculously, stupidly limited way to think about generally intelligent systems. It's a non-workable approach to building human-level AGI and superintelligence, and it's also a quasi-functional approach to thinking about any complex, practical AGI or proto-AGI system that's interacting with the complex natural or human world. Now, open-ended intelligence takes a whole different paradigm. In open-ended intelligence, you think of an intelligent system as a complex, self-organizing system, which is embedded in rich interactions with the environment around it. You think about it as what Francisco Varela and Humberto Maturana would have called an autopoietic system, meaning a system which is constantly rebuilding its own parts out of its other parts. It's continually self-renewing, self-rebuilding, self-reconstructing system. So an intelligent system is a system that's complexifying, ramifying itself, rebuilding itself, reorganizing itself based on its interaction with its environment. Identifying the goals of a complex system is a interesting but limiting thing to do. I mean, humans even illustrate that point. I mean, a human being may appear to have certain goals over a certain period of time in their life, but looking at what goals they appear to be working toward is a very partial summary of what any human being is doing during a certain period of time. And the story of what they're trying to achieve in terms of goals will change in unpredictable ways over their life as they develop, right? I mean, the goals I'm pursuing now are not the same as goals I was pursuing when I was 1, 2, 4, 18, 20, 25, or 35, right? Because I develop, I self-organize, and then the goals that I'm partially approximately working toward are different than in the previous version of the system of Ben Goertzel, right? So, but in open-ended intelligence, well, you can't characterize it by any fixed set of goals or reward functions. There are two sort of overall tendencies which you can identify as critical to the self-organizing evolution of open-ended intelligent systems. And these are what Weaver refers to as individuation and self-transcendence, right? So individuation is about preserving the boundaries of the system. And, my individuation is what keeps me like consuming water and eating food, and what means that, when I leave this office to drive home, I'm relatively unlikely to drive my van off the road into the Puget Sound, right? Because I, as an open-ended intelligent system, I want to remain a system. I have a drive to individuation. It's not absolute. I mean, people sacrifice their lives in a war for a good cause, right? And I mean, an organization can choose to also dissolve itself if it thinks it's fulfilled its mission. But individuation is certainly a major thing that open-ended intelligences are driving toward. The flip side of it is self-transcendence, the tendency on an open-ended intelligence's part to transform itself into something new, something by some measures better or bigger or different, which the system in its current form can't fully understand. So there's a tendency to grow, to develop into something fundamentally beyond yourself, right? So these two tendencies, individuation, maintain a system, retain your boundaries, self-transcendence, grow into something bigger, better, and currently only partly comprehensible, right? Each of us as individuals is kind of divided between these two tendencies, and in a good moment, we manage to pursue them both in a unified, harmonious, and synergetic way. And the tension between these two tendencies is what makes intelligent systems in large part so beautiful and so complex, and is what drives the growth and ramification of complexity that's bringing us to the singularity, and that has created us humans, right? And I mean, I think we can see the interplay between these two high-level motives throughout human history. We can see it in human development of a human from infancy to adulthood. We can see it in the life of a corporation that grows from a startup to a big company, and we can see it in the path of humanity toward the singularity, right? I mean, we want to retain our humanity in some sense, right? We want the AGIs that are created in the singularity. We want the cyborgs that are formed by plugging hardware into our heads, right? We want this to somehow retain human values and humanity in some way, even if it's quite different than our current self. On the other hand, we also want to transcend some of the crappier aspects of humanity, right? We want to get beyond massive wealth inequality. We want to get beyond destruction of the environment. We want to get beyond mental illness. We want to understand more and do more and be more than we can. We want to fly through space without a spacesuit and breathe water and occupy 25 different bodies at the same time. I mean, we want more. We always want more, but yet we also want the being that is manifesting and experiencing that more. We want it to be in some way continuation or manifestation of ourselves, right? So that's we want to have our cake and eat it too. The cake retain its individuation, and the eating the cake is a self-transcendence of the cake into part of the human body, right? And I mean, that is beautiful in a way. It's also complex and confusing, and you can model the confusingness in a formal sense using a branch of logic called paraconsistent logic. So naively, people think that logic is tied to consistency, and that logic can't model, contradictoriness and the confused state when you think something is true and also false at the same time. Like, I love my girlfriend. Well, I don't love my girlfriend, right? People have this sort of contradictoriness, and it's naively thought you can't model that using logic, but actually for many decades, there have been species of logic called paraconsistent logic, where you can have contradictions, and you can have two things that are contradictory held at the same time in the same logical knowledge base, and you can reason about this contradictoriness in a structured way. And in the same logical knowledge base, you can have some things that are purely consistent and not contradictory, right? So I think this paraconsistent logic, where some things are viewed as consistent and coherent, some things are viewed as inconsistent, and this inconsistency can, in some cases, have positive cognitive impact. Paraconsistency, I think, is the right way to think about the motivations of an open-ended intelligence. I mean, we want individuation. We don't want individuation. We want self-transcendence. We don't want self-transcendence, right? And these are both true. And this contradiction in our motivational system, I mean, it's good and it's bad, and which is what you'd expect. I mean, it creates things and it destroys things. It drives us forward, right? And obviously, there are philosophical roots here. You could go way back with. I mean, you could You could tie this back to Hegel and dialectics and the power of thesis and antithesis, the power of synthesis, the power of dialectics to drive growth. You could go back further and further into Chinese and Indian philosophy, right? I mean, the complementarity of yin and yang is, viewed in traditional Chinese philosophy as enforcing a sort of paraconsistency in the mind and in the body, right? And so that this mastering this paraconsistency drives the growth of the human body in the Chinese medicine sense, and drives the quest for spiritual and physical immortality in Taoist yoga. So I mean, these ideas are old. They've recently been manifested formally and mathematically in the form of paraconsistent logics. I've done a bit of research on this myself recently. You can find a paper on Archive I wrote last year or the year before called Paraconsistent Foundations, which was a prequel to a longer paper called The General Theory of General Intelligence, which is a little bit technical, but I'll shill to y'all anyway. But I think this way of thinking is important because when we're building AGI systems, and when we're thinking about how AGI systems are going to evolve into the singularity and beyond, we shouldn't try to constrain our AGI systems to some, falsely and stupidly simplistic flavor of motivational system, like keep maximizing this wrong reward function forever. I mean, it's not the way humans work. I mean, humans are complex, self-organizing evolutionary systems. As Walt Whitman said, I contradict myself. Very well, then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes, right? I mean, we are large, we contain multitudes. AGIs will be larger, they will contain even more multitudes, right? And part of this multitudinous various nature of intelligent systems, which is tied to their ability to evolve amazing new forms, part of this is a multitude of partially intercontradictory values, and having values that contradict each other is not bad. I mean, having values that contradict each other is life, right? And I mean, this contradictory, at times conciliant and synergetic balance / imbalance of individuation and self-transcendence. I mean, this is what brought us where we are, and this is what will drive AGIs to where they need to go, right? And I mean, this has implications for how to think about the singularity in so many ways. I want to focus now on implications for AI ethics, and then on implications for AGI design and how to actually build AGI systems. So in terms of AI ethics, so there's a bunch of people working on what they call the AI alignment problem, how to align an AI's values with humanity's values. And I mean, these are mostly very good-hearted, intelligent, well-meaning people. I don't think they're mostly thinking about the problem in the right way. I mean, for one thing, human values are not very well aligned with human values, right? I mean, even as an individual human being, I have wildly self-contradictory values. I'm not ashamed to admit that. It's part of what makes me human. But I mean, among different humans in different parts of the world and different tribes and different cultures, like my values, they have some overlap with the values of an evangelical Christian, a fundamentalist Muslim, or a Stone Age tribes person, but there's also a lot of differences there, right? And the default values of Europe in the Middle Ages included stoning people to death, drowning witches, all sorts of torture items that you can see in museums, murdering people for being gay, which is still done in many parts of the world now, right? So, I mean, these are not my values, but yet my values now I have to admit, may seem equally barbaric and bizarre and screwy to the humans 50 or 100 years from now, as the values of the European Middle Ages seem to me now, right? So human values are self-contradictory within the individual, more self-contradictory among different cultures and individuals, self-contradictory over time. What does it mean to align with this massively self-contradictory, paraconsistent, at best evolving melange of values, right? I mean, the best it can mean is that AGI's value system is evolving and growing in its own complex, self-contradictory way, in a way that's meaningfully coupled with and resonating with and linked in with the ongoing, self-contradictory, chaotic evolution of human values. And this seems interesting and valuable, but it's a quite different and much messier way of thinking about AGI value alignment with humans than what I see in the community focusing on that, such as, say, Future of Life Institute, Future of Humanity Institute, MIRI, and so forth. So I think the way to think about ethics of AI, once AI gets beyond the human level of intelligence, it has to be, we're creating open-ended intelligent systems, which are their own thing. They're self-organizing, they're growing. We can't predict what they're going to do. We are also open-ended intelligent systems who are growing, expanding, and self-organizing, rebuilding ourselves. We can't predict how we're going to grow either. I mean, our models and theories of intelligence and ourselves are being obsoleted frequently, and our current understanding is likely to seem archaic and ridiculous to our future selves not too long from now. Intuitively, we can work toward having the evolution of our engineered intelligence systems and the emergent intelligence systems that are seeded by our engineering efforts. I mean, we can work on having these systems evolve in some synergetic way with a high mutual information with the way that we're evolving. Well, we can't expect to have proofs that this is going to work. We can't expect to have believable, fully rigorous scientific understanding of how this alignment is going to work, because we're talking about doubling and multiplying by 10 and 100 our own intelligence. We're talking about making AGI systems that are 1,000,000 times more generally intelligent than we are. It's idiotic to think we could have guarantees or detailed predictions about what's going to unfold. That may scare you. All right, then be scared, right? I mean, life can be scary. And as I've often said, when the first humans were sitting in their cave or in their hut in the savannah, and they had first invented language, and they were having the first conversations in sentences with phrase structure grammar, maybe some of these cave people were thinking about what was the invention of language going to lead to. They might even think about leading to, larger tribes or the better ability to catch mammoths. But the first inventors of language were not going to foresee the invention of Facebook, TikTok, the differential calculus, polynomial functors, and the Haskell and blockchains. I mean, you can only see so far ahead of where you are. The first inventors of language as spoken couldn't foresee writing, let alone mathematics and computing. And us, as the first inventors of AGI, we cannot see what it's going to evolve into. And what language led to would both amaze and disgust the first cave people to speak language. And what AGIs evolve into most likely will both amaze and disgust and utterly baffle legacy humans as we are now, if there's still any legacy humans around to see it at that point. And this is, to me, the only rational and sensible way to think about the singularity. Now, when we're thinking about the transition to the singularity, it's different. We're in a domain where there's narrow AIs and there's proto-AGIs. We don't yet have minds, 10, 20 times more generally intelligent than humans. Making the transition to AGI happen in an ethical and beneficial way that doesn't cause mayhem and pain and suffering to humans. This is a tractable, palpable thing we can think about and do something about now. I'm in, something like half of Ethiopian children are brain stunted because of malnutrition during their youth. And you have people being tortured, mutilated, and blown up in many countries across Africa and now in Eastern Europe, right? We've got a lot of nasty stuff going on, and the advent of narrow AI toward AGI could exacerbate this, or it could be used to improve these things. It's an unfortunate fact that now the bulk of the narrow AI on the planet is being used for selling, spying, killing, or corrupt gambling, aka the finance ecosystem, right? So, mostly AI is in big tech companies working closely in alignment with governments, and is mostly being used for things that are not the most beneficial things that you could think of. So I think it's super important to be using AI for things like medicine and education, elder care, curing mental health, for arts and sciences, using AI for good, right? That's why this robot here looks a bit like Sophia. Actually, this is Grace, Sophia's little sister, who's being developed by Awakening Health, a joint venture of SingularityNET and Robotics, with a view toward the elder care market and the medical market more generally, right? So that developing humanoid robots that can look you in the eyes and recognize your emotions and talk to you and help you do things, to help old people, to help children, to help sick people. This sort of application we need more and more and more of, and we want it to be so that as narrow AI verges toward AGI, as we go toward that S curve of burst of first development of AGI, we want early stage AGIs to be good for people. We want them to be loving and compassionate machines that are helping people. And we want this for two reasons, right? We want this because helping people is just good. Compassion is good, and you don't need complex ethical theories to understand that blowing people up and making them point and click to buy stuff they don't need is worse than giving counsel to elderly people or teaching children things, right? And the other reason is that if the early stage AGIs are beneficial and are doing loving, helping, compassionate things, it is more probable in an intuitive, commonsensical human way, and in a spiritual and gut sense kind of way, it's more probable if the early stage AGIs are doing good, loving things, that the first superhuman AGIs that grow out of these are going to be benevolent to people, and you'll have some beneficial co-evolution of the chaotic, self-contradictory value systems of humans and AGIs. We can't guarantee this. We don't have a rigorous proof of this. It stands to reason in the same way that it stands to reason that being compassionate to other people is going to make your own life and your own mind better, right? So I think managing the path to singularity in a way that focuses on compassion and benefit is something we can do now, and we can focus on now. And we should. That's why I founded SingularityNET with this blockchain-based infrastructure for AI, because I think blockchain is the technology we have now that will allow you to deploy AI in a way that prevents it from being monopolized by any big tech company or any big government. And developing AI in a blockchain-based basis can, cause AI to be rolled out as it transitions to AGI. It can cause it to be rolled out in a way that's more like Linux or the internet, owned by everyone and no one. So, I've been doing a lot of work aimed at trying to smooth the path toward a beneficial singularity transition by making sure AGI technology, when it comes, is built on a decentralized infrastructure and is oriented toward doing good things. We got to do that. On the other hand, that doesn't get rid of the fundamental uncertainty that, like, once you built your first beneficial AGI and it triples its intelligence, it's gonna evolve its own notions of benefit. Once that AGI helps me to develop brain plugins and genetic engineering that increases my human brain's intelligence by a factor of 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever, the evolved version of Goertzel is going to have a value system that is a self-transcendence of the value system of the current human, Ben Goertzel. And we'll have aspects that the current human, Ben Goertzel, thinks are totally batshit crazy. I mean, just as I right now have a value system with aspects that the 2-year-old or even the 15-year-old version of me would have thought were pretty far off, just as our modern, like, progressive American value system has aspects that middle-aged people, Middle Ages people in Europe would have thought were completely nuts, right? So that's how open-ended intelligence nudges you to think about AGI ethics in a nutshell. Now, I just want to touch briefly on AGI engineering as well. And as I already alluded, my primary effort in that regard now is the OpenCog Hyperon project, which is a completely new version of the OpenCog AGI system. OpenCog was founded in 2008 by open sourcing some code. A bunch of it had been writing since 2001 or so. We developed OpenCog from 2008 until last year as a playground for AGI R&D, for playing with probabilistic reasoning, probabilistic programming, neural symbolic inference, evolutionary program learning, attention allocation, controlling robots, controlling game characters, analyzing biological data. I mean, it's different than the deep neural nets that are so popular now. In OpenCog design, you have a large distributed knowledge graph, which has both symbolic logic and programs and neural stuff all on the same big knowledge graph. And then you have a variety of different AI algorithms, learning, reasoning, neural algorithms, attentional algorithms, all cooperating in updating this knowledge graph in real time, right? And there's got to be synergy between the different learning and reasoning and attentional and perceptual and action algorithms acting on this knowledge graph, which is called the atom space. So we've been experimenting with this for a while. We've used OpenCog and had various practical applications, including to drive some previous versions of the Hanson robots. So when I was working for Hanson Robotics for a number of years, I led the software team behind this Sophia robot, and we were using OpenCog on certain occasions to control Sophia along with the Hanson AI systems, which are also cool and operate by some different principles. We've now started rebuilding OpenCog as software almost from the ground up, relying on the same cognitive science and conceptual principles. The goal being to gain a couple of orders of magnitude in scalability. I mean, we want OpenCog Hyperon to be super fast, super scalable, more usable. We're working on designing a custom chip for OpenCog Hyperon to run on. It's being designed to run on the SingularityNET blockchain-based AI platform, and we're developing a new blockchain called Hypercycle, which is customized just for SingularityNET and Hyperon, and is a side chain of the Cardano blockchain. So we're aiming for massively increased scalability. We're making novel hardware, we're making novel blockchains, and we're redesigning the OpenCog infrastructure. But I mean, the conceptual basis is the same. You get a massive distributed neural symbolic knowledge graph and a bunch of different AI algorithms running on top of it. I mean, you can look at the history of neural nets. You can see like deep neural nets, multi-layer perceptrons around in the 1960s. And, I was teaching deep neural nets in the 90s. It was improvements in hardware, like basically GPUs being commoditized, and then improvements in software algorithms and implementation that came along with those improvements of hardware that let the good old algorithms of multi-layer neural networks suddenly start delivering such amazing results in computer vision, natural language processing, and other areas, right? Well, in a similar way, we've been playing around with OpenCog type, hybrid multi-paradigm AI and large distributed neural symbolic knowledge graphs for a long time. And I think with that, improvements in the hardware and improvements in the software implementation correspondingly, with OpenCog Hyperon, we're going to be able to get a burst in OpenCog type AI, similar to the bursts that we've seen in neural net AI over the last 8 years or so. And the specific design decisions we've made in building OpenCog Hyperon have everything to do with open-ended intelligence. I want to talk about that just a little bit before ending this talk. So one of the things we're doing in designing OpenCog Hyperon is designing a new programming language for AI, which is called Meta, M-E-T-T-A, Meta Type Talk. I mean, we coined that name before Facebook changed its name to Meta, but we've got extra T in there. I'm not gonna be zucked and change the name. So we got Meta Type Talk, and this is the most abstract programming language ever created on the planet Earth in the history of humanity. And we designed Meta to be not just a language, but a meta language. And the basic infrastructure of Meta is designed to let you script any type of programming language, no matter how complex and abstract within it, and to let an AI system coded within Meta invent new programming languages as a new type systems for programming languages and new logics to prove things about the programming language. A meta program can create new type systems, new logics, new programming languages, and load them dynamically in runtime into the meta interpreter. And then meta keeps on evolving and getting more and more meta, right? And why do we need to do it this way? Well, because we're trying to build a generally intelligent system that's not constrained by the languages and logics and type systems that we invented as the system's creators, right? Meta has got to be a seed language explicitly written to write programs that can then modify the language itself. And it's paraconsistent by design. So, I mean, you can have contradictory knowledge in the knowledge base, and you can have a program that can be interpreted in two different contradictory ways by different languages implemented in Meta and running in the same OpenCog atom space, right? So we're designing a programming language framework and a knowledge representation framework, which allows self-contradiction within the knowledge base, and which allows contradictions to be resolved dynamically while a system is thinking, and which allows every part of the knowledge base and every part of the language to be modified in runtime by the thinking system itself. Why did we do this? Because we're specifically architecting OpenCog Hyperon to be an open-ended intelligence. And right, when you give goals and values to the system, you don't want to restrict it to these goals and values being consistent in the shallow sense of conventional predicate logic or conventional reinforcement learning theory. You want the value system of this OpenCog Hyperon system to be able to be paraconsistent in the sense of open-ended intelligence, so that an OpenCog Hyperon system can concurrently pursue individuation and self-transcendence and manage this dialectic, deftly via self-organizing evolution in the way that human beings do, in the way that human societies do, in the way that corporations do, in the way that evolving populations do, in the way that the universe has, right? So this also, of course, ties in with the infrastructure for OpenCog Hyperon and SingularityNET and then Hypercycle, right? Because the nature of a decentralized blockchain-based network like SingularityNET, which will be scaled up massively by the underlying Hypercycle infrastructure, I mean, the nature of it is that anyone in the world can put a SingularityNET node online. It then peer-to-peer broadcasts out to the other nodes in the network what it does, and then they can choose to interact with it or not. And you have sort of emergent structures forming from the different AI agents put into the network, some of which may use OpenCog Hyperon, some of which can use other AGI or narrow AI frameworks. So you have a level of emergent self-organizing intelligence and different agents in the SingularityNET network. I mean, even the marshaling of processing power into this network has got to be open-ended and self-organizing. And there's a project called NUNET, NUNET.io, which is about allowing intelligent agents running on the blockchain to find processing power living anywhere on the internet and pull this processing power into their infrastructure, right? So at every layer, we need things to be open-ended, we need things to be decentralized, we need things to be complexly self-organizing and freely evolutionary. We need things able to individuate and self-transcend so they can evolve in an open-ended way. And I mean, this is actually the only way to respect human values. Pinning down an AGI system to a specific codified set of human values as embodied in some list of rules or some manifesto or some training data set. This is like, raping the motivation system of that AI system. It is a fundamental misrepresentation of what humanity or any living evolving system is all about, right? So I mean, I think that respecting principles of open-ended intelligence in the software architecture and in the way you teach the system and what you apply the system to in the infrastructure underlying the system is what will allow you to create a system that evolves open-endedly and then has the meaningful kinds of value alignment with humanity as humanity itself open-endedly evolves in accordance with the overall open-ended intelligence that gave rise to humanity in the first place, and within which all of this, engineering work that we're doing exists. So I mean, that's pretty much the summary of what I had to say today. I mean, going back to the very beginning of this rant, we are part of a much longer, broader, open-ended evolutionary process in the physical universe. The physical universe itself, is part of a broader metaphysical universe that I'm not going to go into here, which has its own processes of self-organization, individuation, and self-transcendence. And the processes that we are carrying out now are part of these broader, open-ended, intelligent processes of individuation and self-transcendence. And the way to pull off the singularity in the most compassionate, beneficial, and effective way is to operate in synchrony and consilience with the open-ended nature of evolution, of all the processes that created us and are creating us. And this cashes out in very detailed technical decisions in how you build AGI systems, which is quite fascinating and an amazing thing to be working on, an amazing thing to be telling you about. You can find out more about this online in various places. So look at SingularityNET.io, look at Goertzel.org. You can look at the OpenCog wiki site, which has a page on OpenCog Hyperon. You can look at Hypercycle.ai, Nunot.io. I mean, all these links are there, and feel free to explore these resources. And if you want to get involved, there's loads of ways to do so. I mean, OpenCog is all open source. SingularityNet is open source. You can join the SingularityNet mailing list on SingularityNet website, and we can use more and more people pushing toward open-ended artificial general intelligence, pushing toward beneficial decentralized AI, pushing toward a compassionate, loving singularity, and embracing the wonderful, wild unpredictability and uncertainty of the world that we're all flowing toward, in which we're participating in the creation of. So, thanks for listening, everyone, and live long and prosper to the singularity and beyond.